I'm Conrad Humphreys, and as a professional sailor I've tackled some pretty horrendous seas, but now I'm exploring quieter waters.
I've sailed and raced all over the world, but there's really no place like home.
I'll be travelling along the south coast of Devon in my beautiful lugger, Bounty's End. This is a very, very heavy boat to row on your own.
For centuries, people and goods have sailed these waterways. They were trading routes, fishing waters, and sometimes even battlegrounds.
Boats have sailed up this river for many hundreds of years. I think that adds a certain something.
The sorts of vessels that were coming up were actually capable of carrying 300 tonnes of copper.
The stuff in the 60s is the stuff that's first to collapse.
I'm going to explore the history of these rivers and discover why they're such a fantastic place to sail.
So come on board for my river journeys. Today, I'm heading up the River Tamar.
Here we go.
It marks the border between Devon and Cornwall, and it can be a pretty tricky river to navigate.
There's some lovely swell here. Try and pick up a nice wave so you can get surfing.
I'm starting my journey in Plymouth Sound. I'm going to explore the ancient fort that guards the entrance to the River Tamar and sail past the largest dockyard in Western Europe. Along the way, I will pass under the famous Brunel railway bridge before heading north towards Coat Hill Quay in Cowstock, nearly 15 miles inland. Plymouth has been the departure point for lots of famous journeys. There's Sir Francis Drake's circumnavigation, Sir Ernest Shackleton's ill-fated Antarctic expedition, and of course, Sir Francis Chichester's record-breaking solo sail around the world. And I've left on a few long journeys from here too. Guarding the entrance to the River Tamar is Drake's Island.
I love this island because it is almost 500 years of military fortifications in a tiny, compressed, concentrated area.
Historian Dan Snow is going to show me around.
As the Tudors started to, well, basically fell out with Europe massively, they looked to fortifying the coast, whether it's here at Plymouth, up towards Calshot, Portsmouth, Dover, all that kind of area. Yeah. And this became a central node of fortifying Plymouth. And Plymouth, of course, becomes one of the premier naval bases in the UK. Yeah. And so to protect Plymouth, to protect Devonport, this becomes the absolute linchpin. This is probably 17th, perhaps 18th century. And you can see now these gun ports here. This is almost like a castle, it's like a fortified entrance. Yeah, so anyone landing on this beach, said to be the only sandy beach in Plymouth Sound. You know better than I do about that.
It's certainly more sand here than I've seen in the rest of Plymouth.
And as you've showed, very good for amphibious landing, this beach. So here we've got the fortifications, gateway up there to stop if any infantry attack is going to hit the shores of this island. So they've thought of everything here. And I love this one because this is a bit Planet of the Apes.
What is it? It looks like an old boathouse.
Well, there you go. You see, you're the expert. It's exactly that. It's a boathouse from the 1960s. The Tudor fortifications are still all right. The Georgians all right. The stuff in the 60s is the stuff that's first to collapse. There's a lesson there. There's a little wall there you can see. Looks like a corner of a wall.
Yeah.
And that is the original Tudor gun battery, kind of artillery tower. Cannon in those days weren't very good. Didn't fire that long range. So you put them as close to the water as possible. Yeah. So right on the edge of the water, right on the edge of the island, you've got those Edward VI cannon, which are able then to sort of dominate the narrows across
And
here.
how far could they shoot?
I think probably 500-600 metres reliably. Yeah, and if you heated the shot up, very, very dangerous, obviously smashing into timber ships.
Drake's Island has recently changed hands, and there are plans afoot to open it up to the public.
It's going to have a cafe, it's going to have a shop, you might be able to stay here one day. So I just think this island will become just a wonderful heritage site that will be up there with some of the best museums and attractions in the country, really.
Dan, that was fantastic. Do
Great
you,
island, isn't it?
do you fancy a sail?
Yes, definitely. I'll grab the anchor.
Pull her in a little bit.
Get ready. Oh, okay. I've done a lot of sailing. I wouldn't know how to dead reckon using the sun and the stars.
I would say it's almost impossible. I mean, most navigation with a sextant, on a big, tall, high-sided, big, large boat. Here, you're a metre above the water. To try and get a horizon shot is hard.
For the next leg of the trip, I'm picking up a new crewmate at the Royal William Yard, once the major storage depot for the Royal Navy.
It's so simple, this little boat. We just hook the yard.
Yep.
There's a little loop there.
Marine expert Josh McCarty is involved in an ambitious project to make Plymouth and the waters around it the UK's first national marine park.
A large proportion of our country are very disconnected from the ocean. We want people to love the ocean because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter where we live in the UK, we are connected to the ocean. And be that through the runoff on the roads, the sewerage networks. It's really about sort of catalysing people to build this love for the ocean. %20 of children in the UK haven't been to visit British Beach, and that's quite scary. And so the real hope and the aspiration for the National Marine Park is about connecting a city with a fantastic marine and maritime heritage back up with the ocean.
And what better way to do that than going for a sail?
It's so gusty today that not going to be the easiest. Stay on that sort of course, so you're heading
To that yellow buoy.
Yeah, heading towards that yellow buoy. Cool. And if the sail starts flapping, pull it towards you.
Yep.
The boat is going to feel a little bit unstable with some of these gusts because they're quite strong. We've got these guys coming down here, so I'm just going to keep her a little bit feathered up.
Here we go,
Okay.
go in.
The tide streams through this narrow channel, the Hormuz, which is home to the largest dockyard in Western Europe. Halfway up, the Tor Point ferry carries passengers between Devon and Cornwall. Josh has brought his own transport home.
There's your paddle. Plymouth's that way.
I'll fight you on.
You know where home is from here, don't you? Back to Plymouth.
Indeed. Yeah, it's downwind.
Downwind.
That's supposed to be if you're on a paddleboard. So
Take it easy, yeah. Feel like we've stitched you up a bit, but
Crossing the lower reaches of the River Tamar is a lot easier than it used to be. You'd have needed a boat before Brunel's famous railway bridge and the Tamar Bridge were both opened. Once you pass the bridges, the river takes on a very different feel.
this is my favourite part of the whole of this river. Absolutely stunning. It's not very easy tacking a 18th century lugger. One of the things that this little boat has taught me is to just slow down the sort of pace of life, you know, actually take time to really enjoy the surroundings. You know, in our sort of hectic world, we don't really pause. We go from one project, one thing to the next. It's lovely to be on a wooden boat like this. Everything's constantly changing. There's a part of me that just actually loves being out here on my own, you know, in these little places, sort of almost miles away from anywhere, and it's so peaceful and quiet. You just, you know, a wooden boat, a couple of sails, you know, you can really venture really quite far in this form of travel. I really love it out here. It's so different from being on the ocean when you come up these rivers. There you've got crashing waves and, you know, really struggling against that wind and current, and yet here we are amongst these reeds, we're completely sheltered.
That shelter makes the Tamar Valley perfect for growing fruit and veg. Between the mid-1800s and the First World War, market gardening was huge here.
The Tamar Valley is the perfect environment for growing fruit. It has steep slopes, deep river valleys. The southern facing slopes warm up particularly well in the sunshine. And then obviously you've got prevailing sea air and the proximity of the river, which keeps, you know, the frosts at bay. And the fruit was ripening here maybe 1 to 2 weeks earlier than anywhere else in Cornwall. Some of the cherry trees would grow 50 foot tall and require 60-foot long ladders to harvest, and they would produce tons and tons of fruit.
What was the thing that made the difference in terms of the boom of market gardening here?
Well, it was really the arrival of the train line in Plymouth in 1849. So up until that point, the Tamar Valley was really the market garden for the local parishes, including Plymouth, which back then wasn't a particularly big city. But in 1849, the rail link came to Plymouth, and suddenly the produce could be taken up to London. The outbreak of the First World War in 1914 changed things completely. The land was then given over to growing different sorts of crops that were needed to sustain lifestyles back, you know, during the war years. And then when we reached 1918, the soil was really exhausted from growing those other types of crops. And they had to start a program of re-fertilisation of the soil. But unfortunately, the crops they tried to grow sort of post 1918 were, you know, subject to viruses and eelworm, and you know, they really, really struggled to get anything like the quality and quantity of produce that they were able to between the mid-1800s and the outbreak of the First World War.
Wouldn't it be just fabulous to have one of these waterside properties? I mean, this one is only a couple of metres from the riverbank here. Imagine at a spring tide, it must be quite daunting to be so close, but it's another world, you know, just down there, 250,000 population, probably less than 10 miles away, and up here, you know, you can really feel like you're in the middle of nowhere. It's just wonderful.
This is Coat Hill Quay. 200 years ago, this was a place to buy fresh fish, get your veg, and catch a lift to Plymouth. It's been restored by the National Trust. Under that cover is an 18th century sailing barge called the Shamrock. It's in the process of being restored too.
I just love the freedom that sailing offers. You're constantly occupied. There's things to do. Most young people now, need all sorts of gadgets to keep them occupied. Whereas on a sailing boat, you've got to continually adjust to the conditions. So right now, the wind's just completely headed us, and so I'd have to adjust the sails to get ourselves back on track. She's a little beauty, isn't she? This river would have had hundreds of these little boats. And of course, servicing some of the bigger ships that came up here. And they used to bring the coal all the way up, from as far afield as South Wales, up this river. You think, how did they get them up here with? You can see how much wind we've got. And we're drifting up with the current, and maybe that's how they did it. I know certainly in some places they had horses along the riverbank, and they would get the horses to pull the boats around the corners and some of the towpaths. So we're just coming up to Cowstock, and just around the corner, just a little bit further on, is Morwellum. So you've got Cornwall on this side and Devon on the other side. You've got this amazing viaduct behind us. Everybody seems to just love being on the water. The river is a sort of integral part of their lives, as it has been for hundreds of years. And of course, hundreds of years ago, this was a very affluent river, very important area for mining and for minerals, and a huge amount of wealth was generated here.
It's copper. That's what transformed the whole of this upper reaches of the Tamar. In 1844, they discovered copper, and wow, was it big. They had no idea how much there was there.
Simon Dale has written extensively about the history of the local area.
Describe for me what the copper industry was like here.
All the available places along the river were taken up by spoil heaps of copper. When Queen Victoria visited here in the 1850s, she had to walk around piles of copper ore, waiting for shipment, because they just couldn't cope with transporting it. Take all those trees away, scour the landscape and turn it into a lunar landscape, turn it into rock and rubble, grey and brown earth, slag heaps.
And give us a sense of the size of vessels that we would have seen at that period coming up here.
The sorts of vessels that were coming up were actually capable of carrying 300 tons of copper. There are some very tight bends, but if you get on the outside of them, they are very deep. So they had to be very good navigators. They're going to have to take lead soundings all the way along. It must have taken a long time to tease a vessel like that up.
What were they bringing up here?
So they brought up thousands of tons of lime to sweeten the ground around Tavistock. They also brought up coal from South Wales. And rather fortuitously, that's where all the copper was going. It was going out back to Swansea for the big foundries.
So why did it come to an end?
It came to an end basically because the copper came to an end. By the 1870s, that was really the end of the copper boom. Started in 1840s, barely 26 years worth. And after the demise of the copper, of course, there's the arsenic boom. This area produced half the world's arsenic, and that was being taken to America primarily to tackle the boll weevil over in the cotton fields in America. It was also used, of course, by William Morris, the great arts and crafts movement man, with his wonderful green wallpaper, his green dresses. The green came from arsenic.
So sometimes when you're trying to get up these rivers, there's no option. The wind is all over the place. You've just got to drop the sails, put your back into it with some oars. Of course, this boat's not really designed for one person to row. We're not going to break any records. We've got a couple of canoeists coming up behind us. They're probably going to overtake us in a minute. But they must be thinking, what's that crazy guy rowing that huge great boat on his own for? Huge, populations grew up because of the wealth that was generated from the mines down here and the jobs that they created. So we've probably only got a few minutes before the tide's going to start to flow back down the river, and we're going to need to make sure that we're ready to catch that on the way back down. God, the light is just absolutely amazing. So we're just drifting down. We've got the last of this northerly breeze carrying us back down the Tamar. So having spent the last 2 days navigating this river and really getting to understand its little intricacies, it's really shaped much of the inhabitants here, the jobs, the prospects of so many people. Now we're heading back down. I can just see the Tamar Bridge on the horizon there and the dockyard just coming into view. So another few more hours, we'll just drift down with the tide and we'll be back at home.
Sailing a traditional boat on these rivers has really helped me to understand just how much our waterways have shaped our history. It's all too easy to think about the big round-the-world exploratory voyages that Captain James Cook and Robert Fitzroy undertook, but around the UK, every river, estuary and harbour has made its own unique contribution to our prosperity, our way of life and our understanding of the world.